Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely massive: the monumental rise and inevitable fall of ancient empires. We're looking directly at the historical and theological weight of Jeremiah chapters 49 and 50. And let me tell you, this isn't just ancient history. It's a profound look at power, arrogance, and divine sovereignty that honestly still resonates incredibly well for us today.
Hello everyone, this is TN Inside. Let's begin by reading today's scripture passage from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 49 and 50.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, judgment on surrounding nations. Second, the fall of mighty Babylon. Third, history fulfills the prophecy. Fourth, restoration and the new covenant. And finally, the end of human empires.
All right, let's kick things off with section 1, judgment on surrounding nations.
When you look at the text, it's wild. God's sovereignty extends right over all these neighboring pagan nations, completely disregarding their geographical defenses. I mean, look at Ammon. They aggressively occupied the Israelite land of Gad, and they're prophesied to face a devastating attack. Then there's Edom. They lived with this savage pride high up in the rocky cliffs of Petra, thinking they were absolutely invincible. Yet, they're set to be made completely desolate. We see Damascus, filled with anguish, its soldiers destroyed. Kedar and Hazor, nomadic tribes in the Arabian desert who felt entirely safe, get wiped out by Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar. And finally, Elam, way far out to the east with its capital Susa, famous for its fierce archers, will actually have its bows utterly broken. Now, what's really interesting here is the incredibly dark historical context behind why Ammon faced such a harsh judgment. They worshipped a national god named Molech, sometimes called Milcom. This idol was central to the horrific practice of child sacrifice. You see, in the ancient world, infant mortality was sky high, and tragically, children were often seen as less valuable than adults. Parents wouldn't even name a newborn until it had grown strong enough to survive. And some parents would actually sacrifice one child to Molech in a desperate, twisted attempt to save their other children. It's brutal, I know, but understanding this reality really helps explain why Ammon faced such severe and decisive divine judgment. Moving right along to section 2, the fall of mighty Babylon. You literally can't miss the striking contrast here. At its peak, Babylon is literally described as the hammer of the whole earth. They seemed totally invincible. They functioned as this massive instrument of divine judgment, viciously crushing nations and peoples like a hammer, just smashing objects. But because of their own brutality, their greed, and their arrogance, their prophesied reality is a desolate wilderness. They are to be shattered, completely uninhabited, reduced to nothing more than a roaming ground for jackals, ostriches, and desert creatures. Just like Sodom and Gomorrah, the laughter of children would never be heard there again. It's like going from the absolute top of the world to a permanent ghost town. Jeremiah doesn't pull any punches with his imagery either. He talks about Babylon's bulls. This is a super powerful metaphor for the empire's absolute strongest, youngest warriors. But here's the catch. Despite all their physical might and elite military training, the text declares that on the day of judgment, they're going to be nothing more than bulls passively led to the slaughter. It's a stark reminder, right? The strongest military might on earth is no match for divine wrath. So how did this actually play out? Let's look at section 3. History fulfills the prophecy. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds chronologically, because it's pretty incredible. First, the prophecies are declared. Babylon is used as an instrument to discipline Israel, but then gets marked for judgment due to its own wickedness. Then, in 539 BC, less than a century later, by the way, the seemingly invincible empire just collapses. They are conquered by a Medo-Persian coalition led by King Cyrus of Persia. And this triggers the third phase. King Cyrus actually issues a decree allowing the exiled people of Israel and Judah to return to their homeland in Canaan so they can worship God in Jerusalem. And the specific details of Babylon's fall? They line up absolutely perfectly with the text. They were defeated by an alliance. Interestingly, Jeremiah prophesied they'd be attacked from the north. Now, while Persia was to the east, they first conquered the Medes and formed an allied force that descended upon Babylon from the north, which perfectly mirrored how Babylon had previously invaded Judah from the north. The historical record shows their warriors and foreign troops were literally paralyzed by fear. The waters of their land dried up, their massive treasure houses were entirely plundered, and their false gods, the idols Bel and Marduk, were completely disgraced. Basically, their military and theological power just evaporated at the exact same time. That brings us to a major pivot in section 4, restoration and the new covenant. And this brilliantly illustrates a powerful message of hope. The text maps out 3 incredible phases of Israel's restoration. Step 1 is that immediate historical fulfillment, the physical return of the exiles to the land of Canaan for a real spiritual renewal. But the text looks further ahead to step 2, foreshadowing New Testament redemption, where God's chosen people find forgiveness of guilt through the cross of Christ. And ultimately, this points all the way to step 3, the final resurrection at Christ's second coming, where believers will be raised in glorious bodies, having permanently conquered sin and death. Because ultimately, the everlasting covenant God made with ancient figures like Abraham, Moses, and David, it wasn't just tossed aside. No, it is renewed, expanded, and fully realized through Jesus Christ. This is what Scripture calls the New Covenant. It's the ultimate solution to human failure, uniting God's chosen people in the gospel so they can serve Him in truth forever. Which leads us to our final takeaway in Section 5, the end of human empires. So the absolutely crucial point here is this massive contrast. On one side, we've got the recurring theme of human arrogance, nations boasting in their military strength, trusting their massive wealth, and operating with just savage pride, like we saw with Edom and Babylon. But on the other side, divine sovereignty. The central message of these prophecies is that despite all the human boasting, only God's kingdom actually lasts forever. Honestly, if you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer, remember this stark reality derived directly from these ancient texts. No human kingdom or fate is eternal. Period. Today, the ancient ruins of Babylon still sit in modern-day Iraq. And just as foretold, only the desolate winds of the desert pass through it at night. It is a literal, physical monument proving that no matter how strong a human empire seems, it's eventually going to fall. We've seen it over and over again throughout history, right? Great military powers falling because of their own arrogance. The text details how God used Babylon, but they were destroyed because they failed to acknowledge the actual source of their strength. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. In our own lives, how often do we make that exact same mistake? How often do we boast in our own might, our own intellect, or our resources, instead of acknowledging the true source of our strength and just living humbly? Take a minute to really reflect on that as you go about your day. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.